Hey everyone, welcome back to Ontario Gardening. So today we are going over another easy way to preserve our vegetables that are coming out of the garden or from our farmers markets from our local towns. So we can do a deep dive into what fermenting vegetables are, but we're going to do it super simple and super easy so that you can understand what exactly it is and how to do it. Because there's a lot of information on the internet, it can get super overwhelming. But basically what you're doing is you are taking your vegetables that you are getting out of the garden, and we are making a salt and water brine, and we're pouring it over the vegetables inside of a jar, and we're letting it ferment sitting on the counter for usually a week or two. So if you've ever had sauerkraut, something similar to that, that is a ferment. And basically what's happening is the salt and the water brine is taking the different carbs and sugars naturally found in our vegetables, and they're turning it into good bacteria, good enzyme and probiotics, and it's creating this nice tangy flavor, and it's fermenting so that we can eat it later and have all of these great benefits from the fermentation. So it's really good for gut health with the probiotics. They're super easy to digest, and it's all around a nice way to preserve your produce without having to can it or do anything super crazy. So like I said, it is a very basic brine to make. It is 1 tablespoon of salt to a cup of water, and you pour that right over your vegetables. Now, there is a couple tools that you will need to make life easier. So obviously you're going to need whatever produce you're looking at. You're going to need a cup of filtered water. They recommend filtered water as usually when you have tap water, there's chlorine and different things in it that will kind of kill those good bacteria and enzymes. So we don't want the chlorine in our water. So filtered water. And we want a tablespoon of good salt. So like a kosher salt, sea salt, Himalayan, something like that. You want to usually avoid table salt. You could use it, but it's iodized, and I guess that can kind of mess with the ferment. So if you can go, they have them at the dollar store now, so it's not like you're going to spend an arm and a leg. But if you go to the buck store, you can find different salts, and you're only using a tablespoon per cup of water. So it's not like you need a massive bulk amount. So you're going to need your produce, the salt, the water, and of course you're going to need a jar. And you are going to want to have a weight to put on top of your vegetables in the brine so that the vegetables aren't sticking up above the water. And you are going to need some type of lid. So when talking about lids, just a heads up, you have your typical canning lid. So most people use a mason jar for this process because it's simple and it's easy. So you've got your canning jar, your mason jar, and you've got your basic lid. You've got your band and your lid. Now, if we go and put this on top while our vegetables are fermenting, what happens during the fermentation process is it creates gases, and essentially what you're doing is creating all these gases inside this jar, and you're going to need to quote unquote burp them. And this is if we're using a regular like canning lid. So you're going to need to, like a human, burp them out every couple hours sometimes, depending on how much gas is being produced inside of this jar. So you could potentially be looking at a crack or explosion on your kitchen counter if you're not burping it enough. So this doesn't work well for people who have jobs outside of your homestead, or you just don't have the time, or you forget things easily. That's me. So you're not really going to want to use a regular lid. If you can get a fermentation lid, that is honestly your best way to go. Now, I personally have a kit. Now you can buy these pieces individually, which makes it a lot more affordable. You can buy like 1 weight and 1 fermentation lid, but I actually got this entire kit off of Amazon. This is the Mason Tops fermentation kit, and just to show you here, it comes with 4 of each item. I think this is around $25. So it comes with 4 fermentation lids, 4 weights, and this packer. This packer is not necessary, but it is nice to have. So basically I will show you what the fermentation lid looks like. So as you can see here, it literally looks like a baby bottle. So you have the seal, which is, you're going to use your band from your mason jar, and you're putting that on the top, and you're basically creating there's a hole at the top, and that's what lets get the gases out. You don't need to burp it. You don't need to do anything. Once this jar is full, you're going to put it on the counter, and you don't have to worry about it until your ferment's done. So that's what makes these super, super nice to have. Like I said, you can buy them individually for cheap. And then the weight is a weight that goes on the inside of your jar on top of your produce, again, to keep it submerged underneath your brine. So you don't want your vegetables or your produce to be above the brine. You want everything submerged under so that the brine is doing its magic. If you start having your produce sticking above the brine, you're basically exposing it to air, and that can create mold and different bacteria that we don't want in there, especially mold. Like that's detrimental to your entire jar. Once that happens, it's kind of a throw-out situation. So you always want your produce to be underneath that brine, and having these weights, I'll show you here, are perfect to do that. And it's so much easier to buy these as opposed to try and do like something makeshift, because this is made out of like a glass. And so you're not worried about it breaking down or rusting or anything suspicious inside of your jar. Now this, it's like a pounder. They call it a tamper. And basically all this is, it's a piece of wood, and you can use it to basically push down all of your produce inside of the jar, because you're going to want to pack it as tight as you can to get as much as you can in the jar. That's really all this is. This is unnecessary if you're buying these pieces individually. You don't have to have this. In reality, you could use a wooden spoon or like just a regular spoon that you have, but this is nice to have, like I said, just to tamper down. It's extra, but this all comes in this kit, like I said. So that's the Mason Tops fermentation kit. The one thing to note when buying your fermentation stuff online, and you can buy this in store at like your PB Mart or your your Tractor Supply Company, sorry. So if you're buying these, just make sure to read your labels, because like for example, this one, and I know it's backwards for you, this one fits all wide mouth jars. So I had to make sure to have wide mouth canning jars. Otherwise, the lids wouldn't fit on top of this. So just make sure that you're getting either your regular size or your wide mouth size, making sure you're knowing what you're buying, obviously, before you buy it. So with that being said, kind of talking about how fermentation works and a couple of pieces that you will need to get this done, I am going to show you inside of this. Oh, the one thing I didn't show you, inside of this fermentation kit, there's actually a guide and recipe book. So it goes a little bit deeper into like how to ferment in terms of like how it works. But like I said, basic brine recipe, and then certain recipes as you go through. Like I am personally going to make today the gingered carrot. And so for this recipe specifically, you need some ginger and some garlic, because it adds different flavors. But if you were just doing a basic brine, throwing this on the counter for your first time fermenting and you want to try it, see how that tangy flavor comes, just the salt and water would be fine. But like I said, more in-depth recipes will call for different spices, herbs, and that kind of thing. So with that being said, moving along, let me show you how to do it. It's so simple. I basically have kind of already told you what you're doing. So you are going to first take a gander at your recipe. If you're just doing, like I said, a brine, you're just gonna pack your vegetables in and pour the brine over. But if you're doing a more complex recipe, just take it a quick gander before you start packing your jar, just to make sure you're kind of doing it right. So I've already looked at this before I started this video. This is a gingered carrot recipe. So it calls for 2 to 3 inches of pieces of ginger and garlic clove chopped up with some chili flakes. So I've already pre-done that, and we're going to pack this into the bottom of the jar. And like I said, if you weren't doing a crazy recipe, you wouldn't be doing this. Now the next thing I am going to do is now pack my vegetables. So if you weren't doing anything special and you're just starting out, I've got carrots, but I also have a couple radishes in here. If you're wondering what that looks like, I've kind of made them into coins, because of course you're wanting to put your vegetables, not shred them, unless you're making like a sauerkraut or a kimchi. But if you're just doing your regular vegetables, you're going to want to put them into like coins or small pieces so that you can properly fit them into the jar. So I have some radishes that have already come out of the garden, because radishes only take 3 weeks. And I've got my carrots, so I'm going to mix the radishes in with there just as a different way to, like I said, preserve that food. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to, like I said, pack these into the jar. And again, this is where your tamper comes in handy. Kind of repeating myself here just so there's no miscommunication. We're getting that as far into the jar as we can. I hope you're not getting the glare from the window. I wanted to get some light in here, but that could be backfiring. So we've got as much as we can in here. I want to make sure to get these radishes in here. And you're wanting to fill it till just about the neck of the jar because we do need some space to fit that weight on top and then pour the brine on top. So just making sure everything's in there. And just for fun, we're going to use our tamper in here. And like I said, tamper that down, really push it down. And in reality, that just created a little bit of extra space so I can get a couple more pieces in here. There we go. So I have got the jar packed with whatever it is I am fermenting. Now at this point, we're gonna put our weight on top. So as you can see, the weight is sitting on the top there. Now, some recipes you will see will call for putting a piece of cabbage before you put the weight on. And basically what that's doing is it's creating like an extra blanket seal on top of your produce so that nothing floats up around the weight to the top. So the weight doesn't fit really snug on the top because it leaves a little bit of space for you to pour the brine in. So it is possible that you have a couple little like, you know, garlic pieces or herbs come and stick up above the surface of the brine. And again, we don't want that. So sometimes you put that piece of cabbage just to kind of, like I said, make that extra seal before putting like the weight so that nothing's popping up in and around the weight while it's fermenting. So the brine, we've talked about the brine and that you need salt and filtered water. So the one thing to note is you want your salt dissolved into the water. The one thing about this is you do not want your water to be piping hot or boiling. And the reason is for that is because we don't want to pour boiling or really hot water on top of our produce because we don't want it to start cooking our vegetables. We don't want it to be mushy. We want these to stay nice and crispy and nice. So if you are having a hard time dissolving that salt into regular room temperature water, pop this in the microwave for a couple of seconds, maybe 30 seconds, until the salt starts to dissolve, and then kind of let it cool and let it come back to room temperature. I mean, essentially you could boil it and boil the salt into the water, but you want to make sure that that water is back down to at least room temperature before you go and pour that on top of your vegetables so that you're not essentially cooking those vegetables. So this recipe calls for 2 cups. You could obviously make, if you didn't make enough, you would just simply make more. And like I said, I've got 1 tablespoon per cup. So 2 cups, 2 tablespoons. I'm using sea salt. That's just what I'm using. So I am going to now pour my brine on top of the weight, and it's filling the jar. I'm gonna make a mess all over the place, but in order to show you, as you can see, it's filling, it's all those crevices, and I'm filling it until all of the vegetables are completely submerged. So in this case, it's almost all the way to the top, as you can see that there. So there might be a little bit of air bubbles, no problems. You could take your tamper again and just kind of hit the weight a couple times to move those air bubbles around. Or just kind of take your jar, give it a little shaky shake like this, and we're just removing those air bubbles. You see the bubbles rise to the top, similar to like a soda or a carbonated beverage. Okay, because you don't really want air pockets, because the air pockets will leave room for bacteria to grow in. Not a big deal. We like bacteria, but we want good bacteria to grow in. So I've got that done. We're pretty much done now at this point for the ferment. So now at this point you are going to take your fermenting lid. Like there's so many different ones, but I love this one because like I said, it's essentially a baby bottle. It's got like a pre-hole at the top. It's no mess. I can leave this on the counter. I don't have to burp it. Everything's good. But I'm going to put that on the top, take the band from my canning jar, and that's it. I have just fermented or started my fermentation process for these vegetables. Now, how long are you going to ferment and what to do after this point? So fermentation is going to make these vegetables have like a tangy flavor as you go. So most people start off with a week sitting on the counter. Just to let you know, you do not want to put it in direct sunlight. That's the worst thing you could do for it. It's going to heat up too fast. It could change the way that it ferments. So make sure to put it in like a, not dark spot, just make sure it's not in direct sunlight. And you also don't want it to be in a super, super hot spot either. So don't put it on top of your stove and then cook on your stove. Not a great idea. You want it to just almost stay like at a room temperature. Most of us in the summer, we have our houses cooled off to like, if you're in America, I have no idea for Fahrenheit, but 21, 22 Celsius. And so that's a good spot just to have it in the house sitting on the counter. You're going to leave this for about a week to start, then crack it open and taste it. If it's got a nice tangy taste and you like where it's at in terms of flavor, you're done. If you don't like it and you say, oh, I could use this, this could be tangier, or you want to just, if you're experimenting for the first time and you want to see what level of tanginess you can take this to, go ahead and leave it for another week. Usually most people do their ferments for 2 to 14 days. They say around 3 weeks would be like absolute max, because if you keep leaving this for too long, eventually it's going to start going mushy, and we want them to stay, like I said, nice and crisp and firm and have that nice crunch when we're eating them. So you don't want to leave it for, I would say, more than 3 weeks. That's pushing it. It's going to start changing the flavor. It can almost go rancid, and then like I said, you're going to start getting mushy things in there. So once it's done fermenting, it's to the taste that you like, throw her in the fridge, you're done. The fridge, basically the cold starts to slow the fermentation process right down to almost no fermentation. So at that point you'll be good. And then you can keep it in the fridge, and this lasts for a few months in the fridge. Obviously use with discretion. If you open it and something's smelling suspicious or there's like mold growing it or anything like that, you're not going to want to eat it. But overall, once it hits that fridge, it's good for a couple months. So that is easy fermentation. I know I've ended up rambling on for a few minutes, but I did want to mention before we go that I have gotten this cool book for Christmas. Again, this is going to be backwards for you, but it's called Fermented Vegetables, and it's by Kristen Shockey and Christopher Shockey. And basically what it is, it's a whole recipe book. It does a deep dive, first of all, into fermentation and what it is and how to do it and that kind of thing. But then it also has a ton of really cool recipes. So it's got like sauerkrauts, kimchis, pickles, chutneys, relishes, different pastes, different vegetables. Like I said, you could do dill vegetables, gingered vegetables, just so many different fermentation recipe ideas, because a lot of people actually use this to do pickles with. So cucumbers, you put your cucumbers into spears and you just do fermented pickles. So you're going to use dill and garlic in a situation like that inside your jar with the cucumbers. So many different great ideas in here. Like, it's great illustrations, just kind of showing you different ferments and what you can do. A lot of people deep dive into sauerkraut. That's why they get into fermenting, is not only a way to preserve your food, but because they love to try different sauerkrauts, because there's so many different things that you can do with fermenting. So I hope that you get into fermenting, you at least try it. Like I said, there's so many different things you can do, and it's a great way to try and preserve your food in a different way other than canning. And it's so simple. You're literally throwing a brine on top and throwing this on the counter. And again, this mason tops comes with 4. So essentially I just did 1. I could have 4 lined up on the counter. If I had 2 kids, I could have 8 lined up on the counter. I could have so many things lined up on the counter and have it all going and ready to stock up for the winter in the fridge. So if you like this video, continue to follow along. We have lots more canning tutorials and garden tours and that kind of stuff to come throughout this summer. We will talk to you later. Thanks for joining us. Bye.